Seattle. Late afternoon. Rain that never fully commits to falling. It is April 1965. The sky sits low over the city, pressing gray light through narrow streets, still holding winter inside their concrete. Water gathers in shallow distortions along the sidewalk outside a modest martial arts school that does not look important enough to be remembered. Inside, fluorescent lights hum quietly above wooden flooring polished not by maintenance, but by repetition, by footsteps, by impact, by discipline practiced long enough to become invisible. The room smells faintly of resin, sweat, and damp coats drying near the entrance. And in the center of the room stand a man who has already begun breaking rules that have not yet realized they are being broken. Bruce Lee is not teaching loudly. He is not demonstrating power. He is explaining timing, not with diagrams, not with philosophy, with pauses, with adjustments so small they look like hesitation to anyone who has not spent years learning to notice breath before movement. A student steps forward. Bruce adjusts stance by less than an inch. The student stops mid-motion, not because he was stopped, because suddenly he does not know where to move next. Bruce nods once. Lesson complete. The door opens. Cold air enters first. Then 4 men. Not students. Not curious observers. Not people who wandered in by accident. They move like men who expect rooms to adjust around them. Their coats remain on. Their shoes remain wet from outside pavement. No one asks them to remove either. Bruce turns before anyone speaks. Not surprised. Not welcoming. Simply aware. One of the men steps forward. Older than Bruce. Posture straight enough to suggest decades of correction. Hands relaxed, but positioned in a way that says relaxation is deliberate, not natural. He looks around the room. Students. Equipment. Space that does not belong to tradition, but is not openly rejecting it either. Then he speaks. Not loud, but with the kind of authority that expects silence to do most of the work. They need to talk. Bruce nods. Signals students to continue drills quietly. He walks toward the far wall, near windows streaked with thin lines of rain that distort the outside world into moving gray shapes. The 4 men follow, not crowding him, not giving distance either. Balanced, like a conversation already framed as confrontation. The oldest man speaks first, carefully, respectfully, but not softly. There are concerns about what Bruce is teaching, who he is teaching, how he is teaching. Bruce listens without interruption, not defensive, not dismissive, just still. The words are not shouted. They are structured, organized, historical. Martial knowledge is lineage. Lineage is preservation. Preservation requires boundaries. And Bruce has crossed those boundaries. Repeatedly, students nearby pretend not to listen. But the rhythm of their movement changes. Slightly slower, slightly more cautious, like animals sensing pressure shift in air they cannot see. The oldest man finally says the sentence that will echo through decades that have not happened yet. He tells Bruce he needs to stop teaching. Not forever, not as punishment, as correction, as realignment, as protection of something older than Bruce, older than America, older than the students currently standing in this room, trying to understand timing instead of memorizing form. Bruce does not answer immediately. He looks at the window, rain sliding downward, always downward, never questioning gravity. Then he turns back and asks one question. Who is being protected? Silence stretches, long enough to become uncomfortable. One of the younger men shifts his weight. Another crosses his arms. The oldest man does not move, but his jaw tightens once, almost imperceptibly. He explains again, more directly now. If knowledge is shared without structure, it dissolves. If structure dissolves, identity dissolves. And if identity dissolves, then nothing remains. Bruce nods once, like he understands perfectly, because he does. Then he steps forward, not aggressive, not submissive, just closer. Inside conversation distance now. And he says something that will never be written down, but will never be forgotten by anyone who hears it. He says knowledge that cannot survive being questioned was never knowledge, only control. The room becomes very quiet, not because of fear, Because everyone present understands they are no longer discussing technique. They're discussing ownership of evolution. The oldest man's voice lowers, not in weakness, in warning. If Bruce continues, doors will close. Schools will not welcome him. Communities will not support him. Students will disappear. Bruce listens, fully, without interrupting, without reacting emotionally. Then he asks another question. If a system is strong, why does it fear being tested? This time the silence is heavier, because now the conversation is no longer balanced. It is tilted toward something no one here has a prepared response for. The rain outside becomes louder, or maybe everyone inside just notices it now. One of the younger men steps forward suddenly, not attacking, but entering space more aggressively than conversation requires. He explains structure exists for survival, because without it, everything becomes chaos. Bruce nods again, then answers quietly. Only systems afraid of chaos forget that chaos is where adaptation begins. No one raises their voice. No one moves toward violence. And yet the tension now feels closer to conflict than any sparring session that has happened in this room. The oldest man exhales slowly and says the sentence differently now. Not instruction, not request. Final attempt. Stop teaching, or accept consequences that do not need to be spoken out loud to be understood. Bruce closes his eyes briefly, not in surrender, in calibration. When he opens them again, there's no anger there, only clarity. He says he will not stop. No speech, no dramatic declaration, just 4 words. Calm, precise, final. And in that moment, something much larger than this room changes direction slightly. No one speaks for several seconds. Not because they are unsure what to say, because everyone present understands something irreversible has just been decided. Not loudly, not ceremonially, but completely. The oldest man studies Bruce's face, searching for hesitation, for doubt, for the smallest signal that this is posture, not conviction. He finds none, and that absence unsettles him more than defiance would. Outside, a car passes slowly through pooled rainwater, the sound dragging along the street like fabric across concrete. Inside, one of the students missteps during a drill. The sound of wood against wood snaps through the silence like something breaking that cannot be repaired. Everyone hears it. No one turns. The youngest of the 4 men finally speaks again. But now his voice holds something different. Not authority, concern. He says the world Bruce is entering does not forgive people who dismantle structures publicly. Not socially, not professionally, not historically. Bruce listens, and for the first time, he does not respond immediately. Not because he is searching for words, because he is deciding how much truth this moment can carry without collapsing under its own weight. He finally says something softer than anything he has said so far. He says tradition should be a map, not a cage. The sentence lands harder than anything confrontational could have, because it is not an attack. It is redefinition. The oldest man closes his eyes for a brief moment, and when he opens them, there's something like resignation there. Not agreement, recognition. He says Bruce is forcing change too quickly, that cultures do not survive rapid evolution. That identity requires friction, time, and resistance. Bruce nods slowly and agrees, but adds one thing. He says evolution does not ask permission. Another long silence. But this one feels different. Less like confrontation, more like inevitability settling into place. One of the men finally asked the question none of them wanted to ask directly. If Bruce continues, does he understand he may be standing alone? Bruce looks around the room. Students who do not fully understand what is happening. Wood floors warmed by effort, not ceremony. Mirrors that reflect movement, not hierarchy. Then he answers. He says he has been standing alone for a long time. And that is when something shifts in the room that cannot be measured or recorded. Because the conversation is no longer about teaching methods. It is about identity survival on both sides. The oldest man finally steps back. Not defeated, not conceding, but acknowledging something immovable. He says history will decide if Bruce is right, or if he is simply early. Bruce does not answer. because he knows history never decides anything cleanly. History only records what survives long enough to be written. The four men leave without ceremony, without threat, without resolution. The door closes, and the sound of rain fills the space they leave behind. No one moves for several seconds. Then Bruce turns, walks back to the center of the floor, and continues teaching, as if nothing happened. But everything has. Days pass, then weeks. Some students stop coming, not all at once, never dramatically, just gradually, like erosion. One stops answering calls. Another says work schedule changed. Another says family obligations increased. Bruce never asks why, because he already knows. But new students arrive too. Different backgrounds, different expectations. Less concerned with preserving identity, more concerned with discovering it. And slowly, the room changes. Not physically, philosophically. Training becomes less about correct form, more about functional truth. Bruce stops correcting movements that look wrong if they work, stops praising movements that look correct if they fail under pressure. And that shift begins attracting attention. Not always positive, not always safe. Letters arrive, some supportive, some warning, some simply asking him to reconsider before doors close permanently. He reads all of them, responds to none, because Bruce understands something most systems struggle to accept. Once change becomes visible, it cannot be made invisible again. Months later, he is invited, unofficially, to demonstrate concepts to a group that does not advertise training publicly. Not military, not law enforcement, not sport, something quieter. He accepts, because curiosity, to him, is more dangerous to ignore than opposition. The room they meet in is different from his school. No mirrors, no decorations, no identity markers, just mats, and men who move like they have practiced hurting people efficiently, but not artistically. They do not ask him to teach. They ask him to explain. Bruce asks what they want explained. They say, "Why does what you teach work?" when it should not. Bruce smiles slightly, because that question is the only one that matters. He explains nothing abstract, no philosophy, no cultural framing. He simply demonstrates timing, distance collapse, decision interruption, and in less than 10 seconds, one of their best fighters is touching the floor without fully understanding how he arrived there. No celebration, no humiliation, only confusion. And Bruce says the most important sentence of that night. He says systems train responses, but reality rewards perception. The room becomes very quiet, because every man there understands instantly how dangerous that idea is. If perception matters more than training, then identity becomes fluid, and institutions are built on stability, not fluidity. They thank him, without warmth, without hostility, just acknowledgement. And he leaves, not invited back, but not rejected either, because some knowledge is too useful to dismiss, and too disruptive to embrace publicly. Years later, stories will exist, but never records. And somewhere inside systems that never mention his name, ideas will change. Quietly, gradually, inevitably. And Bruce will continue teaching. Not because he wants to dismantle tradition, but because he refuses to let fear decide what knowledge is allowed to become. And the day he was told to stop will become the day everything quietly started changing. If you watched closely during those years, you would not have seen revolution. You would have seen small corrections, small removals, small simplifications, forms becoming shorter, movements becoming less decorative, timing becoming more important than technique names. And people would argue about it endlessly, because removing complexity feels like losing identity, even when it increases effectiveness. Bruce never argued publicly, because arguments reinforce sides, and sides create walls. Instead, he kept demonstrating, quietly, relentlessly, until eventually the question stopped being, "Is he right?" and became, "Why does this keep working?" And that is the moment real change always begins. Not when people agree, when they cannot ignore results anymore. There were no headlines, no public debates, no declarations of change. But inside training halls that had not changed for generations, something subtle began shifting. Instructors who had dismissed Bruce's ideas started testing small adjustments privately, not in front of students, not in front of peers, only late at night, when identity was not being watched. A stance shortened by 2 centimeters. A strike released half a second earlier. A guard lowered, not out of laziness but trust in timing. And the results were uncomfortable, because they worked. Not always, not perfectly, but often enough to create doubt. And doubt is more dangerous to rigid systems than failure. Bruce never claimed to be right. He only kept asking one quiet question. What happens if we remove what is unnecessary? For some, that question felt like freedom. For others, it felt like erasure. Years passed this way, quietly, without announcement, and Bruce becomes something he never tried to become. A reference point, not because of fame, but because of results that do not fade when tested under pressure. There are moments, very small ones, when he feels the cost. Friends who stop visiting, doors that close without explanation, conversations that become polite, then distant, then absent. But he never changes direction, because to him, truth is not something negotiated. It is something discovered. Late one night, after training ends, he sits alone on the edge of the wooden floor. Lights half off, city noise filtering through thin walls. His hands rest loosely on his knees. Not tired, not tense, just present. And for a moment, only a moment, something like doubt moves through him. Not about whether he is right, but about whether being right matters, if it means standing outside everything familiar. Then he remembers something he realized long before teaching. Clarity is lonely, but confusion is louder. And he chooses clarity again. Not dramatically, just quietly, like he always has. There's another meeting years later. Different man, different environment, same tension. They do not ask him to stop teaching. They ask him something else. If what he is teaching can be controlled. Bruce answers with a question. Can understanding be controlled? No one answers, because everyone already knows the truth. Understanding spreads the moment it is experienced, not when it is approved. And that is when the real fear begins. Not fear of Bruce. Fear of what happens if people stop accepting systems as permanent truths. The meeting ends politely, respectfully, and with the kind of silence that exists when something important has been acknowledged but not accepted. Years later, Bruce will still teach the same way. Still simplify, still remove, still question. And students will leave his school not knowing they are carrying something controversial. Because he never teaches rebellion. He teaches perception. And perception changes everything. Quietly, without slogans, without permission. Some of his ideas will spread into places that never say where they came from. Some will be rejected publicly, while adopted privately. Some will be misunderstood completely. And he never tries to control any of it. Because control is not his interest. Understanding is. There is no single moment where the world accepts him. There is no ceremony where systems admit they adapted. Change happens the way it always does. Gradually, unevenly, quietly. And the day he was told to stop teaching never appears in records, never appears in official timelines, never appears in documented confrontations. But if you look closely enough, you can see the echoes in movements that became shorter, in systems that became less rigid, in fighters who stopped waiting for perfect technique and started responding to reality instead. And maybe that is how real change always survives. Not through recognition, through integration. The rain that night eventually stopped. The streets dried. The world kept moving. But somewhere inside traditions that never officially changed, something loosened, just slightly. And sometimes, that is enough to change everything. There is no monument for moments like that. No record, no document, no proof that a single conversation shifted years of inherited certainty. But history is not only shaped by what is recorded. It is shaped by what quietly stops being questioned. Bruce never declared victory, never claimed transformation, never asked to be remembered. He only kept doing what he always did, removing what was unnecessary, until only truth remained. And that made him dangerous, not because he fought harder, but because he made people question why they fought the way they did it all. And once someone asks that question honestly, there's no returning to comfortable illusions. Years later, people will argue about his philosophy, about his methods, about what he really believed. But the most important thing he did will remain invisible. He proved that strength is not what survives pressure. Clarity is, and clarity cannot be inherited, only discovered. The day he was told to stop teaching was not the day conflict ended. It was the day illusion lost something it never recovered. And maybe that is why moments like that never appear in official history. Because systems remember victories, but they try very hard to forget awakenings. And somewhere, even now, in rooms where names are not recorded, in systems that never speak about change publicly, in training methods that quietly removed what no longer worked, the echo of that decision still exists. Not loud, not celebrated, not even acknowledged, but present. And sometimes, presence is more powerful than recognition. Silence, breath, movement, clarity, and then nothing more, because nothing more needs to be said.